Great radio stations across the land, joepags.com, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. The Parler app is there too, as well as the live video feed. It's the Joe Pags Show. Glad to have you here. Really glad to have back a member of the Trump legal team, senior advisor, a really, really smart lady, and somebody who's going to give us some information that I think you probably didn't have. It's Jenna Ellis. Jenna, how are you?
Great, Joe. Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me back.
Really glad to have you back. I know that it's been an extremely busy time, and thank you for making a little bit of time for me. I've been watching your Twitter feed and your Parler feed, and you've got such great information in there. Let me just give you a little bit of background. I had a guy calling yesterday, and he said, man, I love the president. I love what Rudy's doing, what Jenna's doing, but Pags, I feel like it's over. I have no hope. Jenna, is there hope? You actually outlined, and the Constitution outlines, a way that this can go forward in that the Electoral College voted, but it's not certified yet, right?
Exactly. And, this is actually the great thing about these election integrity efforts are that America is learning about the process and getting a great civics lesson. And, this is something even in law school that they don't teach. They only start with what the Supreme Court has said about the Constitution. Right. You don't even read the Constitution in law school. And that's actually shameful. And so it's incumbent upon us as good citizens to understand how our government works, why we have these processes and mechanisms to stop corruption of elections in place and really understand what it is that's going on here. So, Joe, what happens, of course, is that when the Electoral College met on Monday and cast their votes, in all of the 6 swing states that were challenging, the slate of Trump electors and those delegates met and voted as well. And so the ultimate date of significance is actually January 6th, when Congress meets and when they accept the votes and they certify the Electoral College votes. That's how we get to a president-elect.
I've got to stop you there, if you don't mind. I've got to stop you there because we know that the electors showed up like in Michigan and weren't allowed in. They were barred from going into the Senate, which is by law. They're supposed to go to the Senate at 2 p.m. on that day and cast their ballots. They had to put them in manila envelopes and send them in. But every Republican elector did vote, like in Michigan and Georgia and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and the like, and they will be counted if fraud is found. How do we get to the next step? I wanted to jump in just to let people know that the Democrats are trying to stop the legal process by the Constitution and not even allowing the electors to vote. We do have all of the Republican electors in those states, and their votes are all in, Jenna?
Yes, they are. In those 6 states, all of the electors showed up, they cast their votes, and they did that in a way that, of course, Congress can accept. And so what happens now is that the election integrity efforts do move forward. We've seen all of the witnesses, the testimony, and all of the evidence. We saw that video out of Georgia. We've seen even what the Pennsylvania's own state legislature admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court in the Texas versus Pennsylvania case. They admitted in their amicus brief that the administration of the 2020 election was not according to Pennsylvania state law. On that basis alone, Pennsylvania's state assembly should meet for an electoral session, and they should reclaim their delegates, which they absolutely can do now because that electoral vote has not been certified, and they can cast the appropriate valid slate of delegates. And if it's been, I want to be clear here, this is not about overturning the election results. Right. This is about getting to the accurate results. And when you have a state like Pennsylvania where the result was irredeemably compromised, what the Constitution provides for is that the state legislatures then meet together and they determine how to cast the electoral delegates' votes. And that's not a disenfranchisement of their constituents. They are the elected representatives of their constituents. That's the process of the Constitution to protect against corruption, against foreign influence, as Alexander Hamilton specifically said in Federalist 68. And it wasn't until 1824 that the majority of states even had their delegates chosen by popular vote. It was always done by the state legislatures. So we forget our American history. We forget the purpose of the Constitution. But of course there's hope. But the hope resides in the backbone, the strength, and the courage of these state legislatures to look sincerely at all of the evidence of the outright illegality and the fact that the laws in their states were not followed, the corruption that took place, and taking their delegates back to protect and preserve the legal votes of all their constituents.
I want to circle back to that in a second. Go follow her everywhere at Jenna Ellis ESCube over on Parler, over on Twitter. She does a great job on there and an incredible member of the Trump legal team. Let's talk about January 6th, because a lot of people think, well, Nancy Pelosi's going to run this sucker, so it's over. She doesn't run it at all, right? It's Mike Pence who runs this thing on January 6th. What does that look like? What can he do, or what should he do?
Yeah, and that's something that there's been some misinformation about how Mike Pence is not just the ultimate arbiter of this, and of course,
right.
The founders separated power because Mike Pence is part of course, the executive branch. This always resides with the legislature, so that's why the state legislatures cast their delegates, and then Congress, as the federal legislature, are the ones that count this. And so it's not going to be up to Nancy Pelosi, no, but it's also not going to be up to Mike Pence either. It's up to Congress in a joint session to count those votes. And if there are challenges to election integrity that can be brought forth by congressmen and women and to challenge this and to say that the proper slate of electors has not been put forward, or the Biden votes from Michigan, for example, shouldn't count because of the problems in that state and the law wasn't followed, that absolutely can happen. And it's happened in American history. This is not something that is some constitutional crisis or that America wasn't prepared for. The only preparation that we weren't prepared for was the absolute lawlessness and corruption that happened. But thankfully, we have a system that's designed to protect against that. We just need to have the courage to take advantage and use the process as it was intended.
Let's talk about state legislatures. You brought it up a minute ago. In Michigan, it's a Republican legislature. In Michigan, they're sick and tired of having Gretchen Whitmer kick them around, and she's acting like a queen. She's acting like some sort of tyrant, making these ridiculous COVID rules. But about the election, she's the one that controls the state police that wouldn't let the Republican electors even into the Senate chambers. She's the one that superseded, along with the Secretary of State, the laws of Michigan passed by the legislature there that allow for how the elections are run. They did not run the elections by law in Michigan. You and I know that. Add to the fact that 68% error rate in Antrim County, the same kind of machines were used in Wayne County, where we believe huge cheating happened. So what sort of backbone do you need? What sort of wherewithal do you need from a legislature like that? Because they have standing. Texas might not, allegedly. I think they do. But Texas might not, according to the SCOTUS. But Michigan, the legislature does, to bring suit against Gretchen Whitmer and the Secretary of State. What do they need to do to make sure we have a fair and free election here? Otherwise, if we go to sleep tonight, maybe tomorrow, Michigan just goes to Biden because Jake Tapper says so. What does the legislature have to do?
This legislature doesn't even have to sue the executive branch. They don't need a judicial order, and they certainly don't need the governor or a runaway executive to tell them how and when and where they can exercise their grant of authority that comes directly from the U.S. Constitution to state legislatures. All that they have to do is call for a special session by a simple majority of both houses and run a concurrent resolution, meaning the same text of the resolution through their House and Senate, pass it by simple majority, saying, here's our findings, here's our basis, and what we're doing is taking back our authority to select the slate of delegates from Michigan State. The governor can't prevent that session from being called, or in Arizona, by the way, or Georgia. If the state law says that a governor has to call a special session, that doesn't matter. This isn't a session of the legislature for the purpose of making laws. It's a special electoral session for the purpose of exercising their grant of pure legislative authority. They can call that session themselves. They can pass that resolution by simple majority. They can take back their delegates, and they can certify the proper slate to Congress. And the only thing that is stopping these state legislatures from doing this is pure politics and lack of good Republican leadership. So that's why Giuliani and I are continuing to appeal to these state legislatures and say, do your job. It's Article 2, Section 1.2 of the Constitution.
It's amazing information because, as you just said, here in Texas, the governor's got to call a special session. In Georgia, the governor has to call a special session. You're saying that's only for the writing and the passing of laws or consideration of laws. A special session can be called by anybody at any time in the legislature? Is it the leader of the Senate, the leader of the House, in these individual legislatures? What's the process, do you know? Because if the governor's not, Whitmer's not going to call it, that we know that. So if
the legislature itself can call itself back into session. So
Wow.
it's a matter of the leadership and the simple majority of the House and the Senate in these state legislatures calling themselves back into session. And again, it's not a session for the purpose of passing laws. It has
Right.
nothing to do with the state constitution or the state law. The state constitution cannot override or thwart the authority given by the federal U.S. Constitution. The Supremacy Clause speaks to that. So the state legislatures only need to call themselves back into a special electoral session for the purpose of determining how their slate of delegates is actually sent to Congress. They can do that without the governor's authority and notwithstanding any other provision of state law, because they have an express plenary, meaning absolute power
Right.
from the U.S. Constitution to do that.
And Americans did not know that until you just told them, and thank you for doing that. One last question. I know how short on time you are. The question is this. You see what's happening on Twitter. You see what's happening on NBC, CBS, ABC, even Fox News Channel, CNN, MSNBC. They've all been lying for a very long time about this guy being the president-elect. They all say it's over. They all say Trump is a sore loser. He's trying to steal the election. The court of public opinion, sadly, is swayed by them big time. I'm glad you and I are speaking. Rudy and I talked just the other day. But the public opinion out there is that Biden won and Trump should probably back down. Even a lot of Republicans are starting to say that. Is there any fear within the legal team and with the president himself that if we keep on pushing this and if it goes to the January 6th session and maybe the president wins, which I think that he should, that all hell will break loose in America?
Well, you know, there have always been times in American history where courageous patriots have protected the security of our supreme law of the land. We are a nation of rules, not a nation of rulers.
Yeah.
Our ruler is not the mainstream media. It's not these fearful rhinos. It's not anyone else. It is our supreme law of the land. And by following the Constitution, it doesn't matter who doesn't like that. That's our supreme law of the land. And so I hope that these state legislatures will have the courage to protect and preserve the American system in our nation and the process by which we select our American president, and they fight against corruption. They have to. Otherwise, if for the breakdown of free and fair elections in this country, then moving forward, this will just encourage and basically codify cheating. That would be the standard in this country. So we have to make sure to not believe what the mainstream media's narrative wants to say. We have to look at the Constitution for ourselves, and we have to be strong advocates for liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much for working so hard for America, Jenna. I really appreciate that. And I love that you're on his legal team. Let's talk again very soon. I know you've got a big meeting coming up here. Thank you for making the time today.
Thanks so much, Joe.
All right, we appreciate you. We're back after this in the Joe Pag Show. Stay right here.